The X-Files, Season 2 Review. Hello and welcome to my review of Season 2 of The X-Files, which ran from 1994 to 1995 on US television. We all know the drill by now, and there's a lot of episodes to get through, so let's just get on with it. The season begins with Little Green Men. After the events of the Season 1 finale, the X-Files have been shut down and Mulder and Scully have been separated and put on different assignments, but they're still keeping in touch. Mulder's kind of fed up and pretty much thinking about quitting the FBI until an ally gives him a new reason to stay interested, and he ventures off to Puerto Rico to an abandoned SETI site where extraterrestrials may have been active. This is an okay episode. It seemed a little bit kind of dull, honestly. Some of the character stuff is good between Mulder and Scully, but the story itself seems a bit blah, really. One of the weaker season premieres, I'd have to say, honestly. The next episode is The Host, and this is the giant fluke worm one, fluke man one. That's kind of disgusting. It's a lot of fun, though. It's certainly a much stronger episode than the season premiere, even though we've still got this kind of subplot of the X-Files supposedly being shut down. But, you know, Mulder's investigating them anyway, and he's roping Scully in anyway, even though neither of them are supposed to be doing that. But fuck authority. I couldn't agree more. This is a really good episode. It borders a little bit on the silly side, but it's a lot of fun, so that's fine by me. The next episode is Blood, and this is a great episode. This is the one where subliminal messages are turning ordinary people into insane killers in a small town. This is a really, really strong episode. It's got a great dark sense of humor as well. Some of the messages are really kind of hilarious in a twisted kind of way. Yep, this is a really fun, really strong episode. The next episode is Sleepless. This is about a Vietnam vet who was experimented on and he can't sleep anymore. They were trying to turn him and his compatriots into super soldiers, I guess. And as a result of that, he can kind of make dreams come out into reality. I'm not keen on this episode, to be honest with you. It's a little bit dull. It's got some interesting stuff in it, particularly with the introduction of Krychek, who's a fairly significant supporting character. He seems initially like he's Mulder's new partner, like he's a relatively green new agent. Of course, this is the X-Files, so he turns out to be a plant of, cigarette smoking man. But that's, I don't know, that's kind of the only interesting thing about this episode, really. I kind of find the whole premise a bit boring. Maybe that's just me. The next one is a two-parter, Dwayne and Ascension. And now, at this time, of course, Gillian Anderson was pregnant. It's fairly obvious, even though they're doing their best to keep it hidden, but it's still fairly obvious. And at some point, they kind of needed to get rid of her for a few episodes, and this is how they do it. And that kind of problem that, that was unexpected, it kind of led to something that they probably wouldn't have done otherwise, which is, of course, Scully being abducted, which is a fairly significant moment in the show's mythology. It's kind of ironic that they probably wouldn't have done that without those behind-the-scenes reasons. Anyway, this is a really strong two-parter. I think, didn't the first episode actually win an Emmy or something for Chris Carter? I'm fairly sure it did for writing. It's a really... Even though, like I've said in the Season 1 review, I'm not big on the mythology episodes these days, but this is a really strong and compelling two-part story. The next episode is 3. This is basically a vampire episode, albeit a slightly different take on vampires. To be honest, it doesn't entirely work. I kind of find it a little bit disappointing, honestly, that the X-Files never really did a really good, scary vampire episode. There's another vampire episode in season 5, but that's basically a comedy, and it's a good episode, but again, it's basically a comedy. This is a serious episode, but it doesn't really kind of work. It falls a little bit flat. And I kind of think it's a shame that, a show like The X-Files, that had a long run as well, never really did a really good, really scary, proper vampire episode. Seems like a little bit of a missed opportunity to me. The next episode is One Breath. This is the conclusion to the Scully abduction story, and it's the conclusion to the opening 8-episode arc where the X-Files have been shut down. After this episode, the X-Files are reopened, and Mulder and Scully are back working together on it. This is a good episode. Mr. X, who has arrived in this season as Mulder's new informant to replace Deep Throat, proves himself to be a fairly dangerous character in this episode, and that's very interesting. Again, it's good. Again, I'm just kind of indifferent to the mythology stuff this time around. I loved it back in the day, and there's some good character stuff in it. Again, these days, I'm not that into these episodes. The next episode is Firewalker, which is basically another Base Under Siege episode. This time it's a scientific team working near a volcano. They've unearthed some kind of flower parasite that its pollen kind of gets into people and basically uses them for inhabitant, and then when it blossoms it kills people. And it's actually based on a flower that does that to ants. It's really kind of gross. This is an okay episode. Its major problem is that it's a bit too similar to season 1's Ice, and it's really nowhere near as good as Ice. But it is nice to get back to just a Monster of the Week episode with Mulder and Scully back working together. It's good to get back to normal, basically. The next episode is Red Museum. I think this is actually a really good episode. This starts off kind of like the first half of the episode. It seems like it's a Monster of the Week episode. Maybe even something supernatural or something like that. And then it kind of takes a real swerve midway through, and you suddenly realize you're actually watching a mythology episode. Now, despite what I've said about mythology episodes, I do kind of like this one. I like the twist, and there's some really good dramatic moments in this, especially with the return and the return of the guy that killed Deep Throat at the end of season 1, and the fact that we actually get some closure on that, in that, the bastard gets what's coming to him. So this is a good episode. I like it. The next episode is Excelsius Die, which is a really weird episode about maybe poltergeists or maybe astral projection or something going on in an old folks' home. I don't like this episode. It's kind of boring, honestly. To be honest, I can't even remember the last time that I watched it. I've seen it a couple of times, but the last few times I've watched this season, I've kind of skipped this one because it's boring. It doesn't appeal. The next episode is Aubry, which is about an FBI agent who disappeared in the 1940s. Their body is found by a detective who, for some reason, just suddenly drives out to the middle of a field one day and digs up this corpse that's been hidden there for 50 odd years. Mulder and Scully investigate, and when a homicide occurs that's similar to a homicide back from the 40s, there's something even stranger than they thought going on. Now I think this episode is an absolute cracker. You never hear much about this episode. I mean, I know I wouldn't exactly say I was particularly au fait with X-Files fandom, but this episode never really strikes me as one that gets a lot of kudos or a lot of people talking about it. I think it's a really, really great episode. It's an incredibly dark and really scary story with a really chilling idea. You got Terry O'Quinn in there, the great Terry O'Quinn as one of the detectives. Yeah, I really like this episode. Sarah B. Charno wrote it. I don't think she wrote many. This is actually a bloody good episode, in my opinion. One of the best of the season, I would say. The next episode is Irresistible. This is the one with the necrophiliac, who we can't call that. He's a death fetishist, because they couldn't say necrophiliac on TV in the 90s. That's basically what he is. This is a more famous episode, and an episode that gets a lot more kind of critical acclaim. I'm not really that keen on it, honestly. It's because it's not really an X-File, is it? It's more like an episode of Millennium than an episode of the X-Files, and I'm not really big on Millennium, to be honest with you. And the kind of the flashes that hint at something supernatural, even though it isn't, just kind of muddy the water and make it vaguely confusing. I mean, it's okay, but I do find it seems a little bit odd to me that this episode seems to get a lot of kudos. Well, like I said, the previous one seems to get overlooked. I think Aubry is way better than Irresistible. I'm sorry, I just do. The next episode is The Hand Devilist, which is another cracker. This is another of my favourite episodes. Two teenagers are murdered in a way that suggests some kind of satanic influence in a small town. Mulder and Scully go there. This is a really great episode. It's scary, but it's kind of subversively funny as well. This was the last episode for a long time written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong until season 4, and it's a hell of a way to go out on, because basically you have this situation where, like, the school board, who are all supposedly of this Christian school, they're all actually Satanists, though they're not behind the murder. Somebody else is, somebody who may actually be possibly the devil herself, kind of pissed off at the fact that these supposed worshippers don't actually do any of the things that they're supposed to do. This is a really, really great episode. I'd say it's definitely another of my favourites of season 2. Very dark, very scary, and kind of subversively funny as well. The next episode is Fresh Bones. This is basically a voodoo episode. And it's boring. I'm sorry. I'm sure this episode has some fans. I just find it kind of bleh. Especially after the previous episode. This comes across as a real downer. I'm sorry, I just think this episode is dull. Again, like Excelsis Die, it's one of those that I've kind of skipped on recent viewings. I've seen it a few times, but again, not for a very long time, because it's kind of boring. Sorry. Next up is a two-parter, Colony and Endgame. This is another mythology two-parter. Now, I will say, like I've said again for the 50th time, I'm not that into the mythology episodes. Season 2 has some pretty good ones, I would say. The Dwayne Barry two-parter, Red Museum, this one. This is actually a really good one. It's pretty outrageous when you kind of think about it. It's a pretty huge and epic two-parter. And it really rips the Band-Aid off in terms of where we're going with this plot. You know, up until this point, they've kind of been really circumspect in regards to the aliens and whether or not there even are any aliens or not, whether it's all just some kind of government cover-up to cover up something else entirely. And suddenly we've basically got shape-shifting alien assassins running around, and multiple clones of... Yeah, this is a pretty good episode. Again, some of its effectiveness is lost by, you know, later retconning and the way the mythology goes, but it's still one of the best mythology stories, I would say. The next episode is Fearful Symmetry. This is a bit of a weird one. It's an alien abduction episode, but it's not connected to mythology in any significant way. And I don't know, it seems a little bit on the preachy side. It's about alien abductions, but it's about alien abductions of animals who, I don't know, it implies maybe they're trying to save before humanity makes them extinct or something pompous like that. Again, this is kind of a boring episode that I have not really watched very often. Yeah, it's a bit dull and it's a bit preachy. That's never exactly a great combination in my book. Oh god, and here's another one. The next episode is Dodcom. I don't know about preachy, but very boring and very silly is the best way to describe this one. This is a US Navy destroyer crew turn up, apparently having aged decades in the course of a few days. Mulder and Scully travel to the ship's last known position, and the same thing starts happening to them. This is a really boring episode. Apparently it was really expensive. It was supposed to be a cheap bottle show, and because of the makeup it ended up being one of the most expensive of the season, and Duchovny and Anderson hated it because of the crappy fucking makeup they had to endure as well. I don't think they'd have liked being aliens in Star Trek. Yeah, this is just, it's really, really boring. And the solution is really, really silly. You know, it would have been better if it was some kind of Bermuda Triangle time warp thing, because the answer that we do get is kind of dumbass. So it's silly and it's boring. That's nearly as bad as boring and preachy. Another pass, I would say. The next episode is Humbug. Now this is a silly one, but unfortunately it's supposed to be. This is the first episode written by the legendary Darren Morgan, and it's the first time the X-Files does, but certainly not the last, that the X-Files does a full-on comedy episode. And it's a cracker. There's some strange killings going on in a small town which was basically built around an old sideshow. So most of the town's residents are basically people who are physically deformed and were basically circus freaks. That's probably not very politically correct way of saying it, but that's what they called them then. So don't shoot me. This is a really, really, really funny episode. It's kind of gross. The monster is kind of gross. It's also a rip-off from an early 80s horror movie, I'm fairly sure. I won't say which horror movie in case you haven't seen this episode, because it kind of gives it away. But yeah, this is a really, really fun episode. It's a great debut for Darren Morgan, and it's, at the time, this was kind of like a, what the fuck is this? You know, we'd never had a comedy episode before. Since then, of course, they did many humorous episodes, many of which are among fans' favourites, and this is certainly one of mine. I really like Humbug. The next episode is the Kalusari, which is basically a rip-off of the Exorcist, sort of, maybe. This is okay. It's not bad. It's got some good scary moments. It does kind of turn into an Exorcist rip-off in the last act, which kind of makes it seem a bit cliched and but it's not bad. Oh, this was Sarah B. Charno as well, apparently. Yeah, sorry, it's nowhere near as good as Aubry. The next episode is Femasculata, which is basically a TV version of Outbreak. Oh dear, we had one of those last year and still got it, actually. Fortunately, it's not one of the ones, it's not the disease that we see in this episode, because that's pretty gross. This is okay. It's actually probably better than the contemporaneous film Outbreak, which is really silly. This has some good stuff in it. I wouldn't say it was a classic, but it's a solid enough episode. The next episode is Soft Light, which is a really good episode. Adrian Monk is in this episode. Tony Shalhoub, of course, as a guy whose experimental research has led to him developing a shadow that can kill people just by touching it. This was the first episode written by Vince Gilligan, who went on to become one of the show's best writer, and of course has since become much more famous with shows like Breaking Bad. And this is a really solid debut for him. It's a really strong episode. There's some more stuff showing just how much of a creep Mr. X is. It's a great premise. I'm sure it's probably wildly scientifically inaccurate, or complete bollocks, to put it another way. But I don't watch this show for that kind of thing anyway. I watch it for scares. And this is a really great episode. The next episode is Our Town. This is another favourite of mine. I get the impression this isn't terribly popular, but I think it's hilariously sick and twisted. It's not a comedy episode, but I find it hilarious, just how sick it is. I guess that shows you how sick I am. Mulder and Scully go to a small town to investigate a missing guy, a missing poultry inspector. We end up in a situation, I'm going to say it, if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry, but I can't really talk about this episode without giving away what it's about. Basically, the whole town are cannibals. People really are what they eat in this town. It's ridiculous, but it's really, really scary and really, really funny at the same time in a thoroughly sick way. I like it. I don't know what that says about me. I like it. The next episode is the season finale. 25 episodes. I think this is actually the longest season of the X-Files. Usually 24 in the early days. This one has 25. And it's Anasazi. Of course, it's a season finale, and it's a mythology episode. This was a really good episode at the time. Again, it's one of those that hasn't necessarily aged terribly well, but then again, maybe that's just me, because you know how I feel about the mythology stuff. It kind of makes me yawn now. I wouldn't, even given that, I wouldn't say this is one of the best episodes. It's not one of the, there's better mythology episodes in season 2, and I would say that the season 1 finale, the Erlenmeyer Flask, is probably better than this. But it's okay. It's okay, I guess. And that's the X-Files season 2. Overall, I'd say it's a pretty solid season. I don't think it's as good as season 1. I know that some people prefer later seasons to season 1. I kind of like season 1 more, simply because it's got more kind of Monster of the Week episodes and less of the conspiracy stuff. And unfortunately, some of the Monster of the Week episodes in season 2 are really kind of weak. I mean, there's a couple of weak ones in season 1, but there seems to be more in season 2 just from doing this review. I mean, Dodcom and Fearful Symmetry and Fresh Bones and Excelsis Die. That's more weak episodes than I think season 1 has. So I don't like it as much as season 1. There are some really good episodes. Humbug, Soft Light, The Hand Devilist, Aubry, which again is massively bloody underrated. But it's not my favourite season. There are even later seasons that I prefer, one of which is probably going to be controversial when I say it, but never mind. But it's still a pretty solid season. I give the X-Files season 2, and I better give it before my voice runs out, because I can feel the strain on it. I give the X-Files season 2 a strong B+.